The majority of people in America are sick and broken. 93% of U.S. citizens have some marker of metabolic illness. The group of us are sick, and the group of us are sick because we have metabolic syndrome, and the best way of eating for metabolic syndrome is low carb. So people that have type 2 diabetes, basically their bodies can't handle carbohydrates, so they just shouldn't eat them. Not moderate them, they just shouldn't eat them. Exercise is magical. Like if we were to think of one thing that could help every part of the brain and body, with no downside, it would be moving and exercising.
Hey there, welcome to the Happy Habit Podcast. I'm Matthew. I'm here every week talking health and well-being. If you're enjoying these episodes and haven't showed your support today, please like, subscribe, and tell other people about this podcast. They may get some value from it too. And if you're on YouTube, it's really interesting. The vast majority of people who are consuming these episodes on YouTube haven't subscribed just yet. So if that is you, please click that subscribe button. We've just reached 2,700 subscribers, which is amazing given I only started posting these episodes on YouTube in September of last year. I'm aiming to hit 3,000 in the coming weeks, and perhaps you can help me get there. In this episode, I talk with Dr. Mark Cucuzzella. He is a doctor and author of the book Run for Your Life. He's also a man who knows much about diet and exercise, having run over 100 marathons himself. He tells me why so many of us are metabolically sick today. He explains why he recommends a low-carbohydrate diet to his patients, but he doesn't get fixated on measuring every gram of food. We hear how the body is very good at using fat for fuel and learn what kinds of exercises are best for burning fat and if you want to become healthier and stay healthier for longer. Plus, Dr. Mark talks about zones of exercise and the value of engaging in each zone of exercise, be it low intensity or high intensity, and why strengthening the feet through barefoot walking is vital for your health. We will talk about exercise shortly, but can we talk initially about nutrition? And in your vast experience, what impact do you think poor nutrition is having on people's health today?
Oh gosh, that you could write books on that, and people have, but yeah, so the poor nutrition is driving most of the chronic disease that we see, in America, probably a little more prevalent, Matthew, in America than Ireland, and you can look at it like, how did our parents, our grandparents eat? And that's not all about like low carb or high carb or vegan. It's just really, if you dive right into it, it's the processed foods, so the processed foods are things that our genome really have never dealt with, and kind of the dose makes the poison, so here it's added sugar, which is mostly in the form of drinks, all the sugar drinks the children are drinking, all the white flours, refined high glycemic flours, which create the high insulin state, which creates the diabetes, that's putting weight in the middle of the belly fat, right? And then there's this whole other side of the vegetable oils. So the vegetable oils, create a lot of ROS, we call them reactive oxidative species, and inflammation. These are going to be, and that's mostly in the processed foods, so people don't sit down and grab a bottle of canola oil, kind of like good olive oil, and pour it on their salad. But it's mixed in with so many things, such as salad dressings, and any kind of packaged or processed food tends to have a lot of canola, soybean oil, things that are deep fried, and a lot of industrial oils that aren't just natural fats, so in Ireland, your natural fats are going to be, your good quality butter, lard, like if you have, pigs in nature, not processed ones in the big factories, but yeah, your grandmother would never throw the lard away, good quality like olive oil or avocado oil, because they're not kind of heated or industrialized or pressed, so the oil that comes out of, for extra virgin olive oil, there's no heat extraction, there's no bleaching, there's no process other than pressing it. So that's all really people need to know is get off of the stuff that your grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. Probably 80 to 90% of a child's way of eating in America now is some type of processed food, shelf stable, a lot of carbohydrates and not much protein. Because we need protein for growth, athletics, growth, children, we need our protein. And then aging, as we age, if we lose our muscle mass, muscle's the organ of aging. And if we become frail and we lose muscle mass, that's no good. The deterioration of the way of eating. Now we don't even have a generation that can enlist in the military. They're not well enough to fight anymore. So
it's extraordinary. It really is. So I think the central takeaway there is avoid ultra processed foods, foods that really aren't foods at all, and that are just these products that are manufactured by these multinational corporations. You alluded to carbohydrates there. You do see some benefit in consuming a lower carbohydrate diet. This is away from the processed foods that we mentioned already. Can you talk to me about your observations about the benefits of a low carbohydrate diet?
So most of the people we see in our medical clinic have some feature of metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, which would mean, so if you're diabetic, you have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, which would be early diabetes, essentially you're not tolerant of carbohydrates. So your body can't process the carbohydrates. You create a lot of insulin to clear the carbohydrates. So if you were allergic to peanuts and we wanted you to not have any problem, we would say, Matthew, don't eat peanuts. So people that have type 2 diabetes, basically their bodies can't handle carbohydrates. So they just shouldn't eat them. Not moderate them, they just shouldn't eat them, or at least give them that choice, so you can have some non-starchy carbs and vegetables and maybe even a little like real potato around the edges. But again, back to the white flour added sugar. But the majority of people in America are sick and broken. I think the latest large article on the topic showed that 93% of U.S. citizens have some marker of metabolic illness. So the majority of us are sick. So if you just took, what's best for the group of us are sick, and the group of us are sick because we have metabolic syndrome, and the best way of eating for metabolic syndrome is low carb. So now 50 years ago, people were broken and sick, so they could eat just real food and not really worry about carbohydrates so much. They were fine. They were in homeostasis. But right now, if you're broken already, you need to kind of get out of that situation, and lower your carbohydrates. But again, you need a clinician because there could be other things. You could be under stress, sleep apnea, like there's a lot of other features, so it's not just the diet. That's why, in our clinic, everyone's got issues that drive them. They have food addiction, they're on night shift work, what be it that got them into that situation, and let's try to back them out. And food is one tool, that we can use to help people, but we also have to work on their mental health. Exercise is magical. Like if we were to think of one thing that could help every part of the brain and body, with no downside, it would be moving and exercising. So keep it positive, not restrictive for people.
Just on that low carbohydrate approach, as far as the macronutrient split is concerned, what percentage of somebody's diet, if they're looking to get healthy, if they're looking to manage their weight, for example, if they're suffering from obesity, what is the macronutrient split like as far as the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the fats are concerned?
Matthew, that varies person to person. So you kind of earn your carbohydrates with exercise. So you look pretty well, look pretty strong, have good muscle mass. You're moving. Say you had a manual labor job. So you can burn through a little carbohydrates, but still be burning fat because you're basically utilizing the carbohydrates every time you move your muscles. Doesn't take insulin. But if you're like a postmenopausal female who has a desk job, who might get 2,000 steps a day, who's dealing with hormonal issues, that person may need to be down to about 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. But, most people don't want to count, and they don't count well. So I'm not really strict with people about, you need to count this macro, weigh this. So I give them a list of foods. It's a green list food, and it's probably like similar to any other list of low carb foods. It's going to have pretty much any animal product, right, other than milk, because milk is carby, right? Milk's for children to grow, but that's going to be any meat, any fish, cheese. It depends on where you are in the world. You have amazing cheese in Ireland, right? You have good meat in Ireland, you have good fish in Ireland, so you're near the sea. So you have a nice mix of animal protein. I live in a rural area pretty far from the sea. So if I'm going to get good quality animal protein, I have a farmer, who has pigs and cows. I can't get good fish where I am. And then the non-starchy vegetables, so I just had lunch. I had avocado, a little local tomato with a leftover grass-fed cheeseburger, and I'm good to go. So I don't know how many grams of what or what that was, but, I've got a glucose monitor in my arm and it doesn't touch it, because that's high protein, adequate fat, low carbohydrate. But I get, the vegetables are good, right? So if you have, but they're all seasonal, we can't get certain things certain times of the year, so that do the best you can. I can't imagine in the winter in Ireland, you have fresh kale coming out of the garden. So yeah, then even, get some frozen vegetables, some canned vegetables in the off season. And then you might be a little more vegetable heavy in the summer, and then in fall vegetables are a little more starchy. And I think there's probably something to that, because we needed to kind of fatten up for the winter a little bit, not in a bad way, just put a little more subcutaneous fat, and you might have a little more of that in the fall. They're going to be your squashes and things like that in the fall.
Part of this metabolic equation, as you've mentioned already, is exercise and incorporating regular exercise into your daily regimen. You have said that we are designed to burn fat, and we can use this knowledge to our advantage.
As humans, right, we are designed. So in our mitochondria, and I think now, like, people talk about mitochondria, like 10 years ago, they're like, what's that? But mitochondria, healthy mitochondria is the substance of life. I think they say like 10% of our body mass is these little energy factories. And it's kind of like a hybrid engine, so you can go on electric, which is this highly efficient fuel like a Tesla. And if you need to do high intensity, something short or intense, you can use the gas, right? And that would be the sugar. We don't store much sugar, but the body is really good at using fat for fuel, right? If we can adapt our bodies to use body fat and the fats we eat for fuel, it's like a slow burn fuel and much less exhaust, much less inflammation. So say you take a vehicle, if it's like a muscle car, as we'd say in the US, right? There's a lot of exhaust, right? They use a lot of gas, but they're really fast and powerful. And then you take like a electric vehicle, right? Not quite as powerful, but there's no exhaust, right? There's no inflammation. The heart loves fat for fuel, right? So our heart's designed to work even in, you're in Ireland there, even in times when you had famine, in the 1800s, right? Somehow the body still works. So it adapts. So we want to basically use fats as our primary fuel source, just for health and healthy aging. And then, be adapted. People call it metabolic flexibility, but that means your mitochondria can use sugar. So say you're a CrossFitter, you have CrossFit over there. It's like high intensity exercise. You need to be able to light some matches, so to speak. That's the sugar. And then the log on the fire would be the fat, right? In the wintertime, you want that log on the fire, not a bunch of kindling, right? They keep throwing the kindling in. That's the sugar. But you get a big log on the fire, and that's burning. That's good. And then you get your meals, and then you're not snacking all day, right? So you eat fat and protein meals. Like I had this for lunch, and I'll feel good, and I'll be hungry and eat something later tonight. I'll cook something out. It'll be some type of animal protein with a salad, but I won't be hungry in 2 hours. It gives you sustainable brain energy.
I've heard it said that long, steady state cardio isn't as effective as burning fat as high intensity exercises are. What is your position on this?
Yeah, and like everything, Matthew, the answer is always it depends, and it's nuanced, right? So the mitochondria burn carbs and fats. So the lower intensity exercise, and you don't even call it exercise. So say you're just walking, you're working on a farm. So we call this kind of zone 1, zone 2. So we build the slow twitch muscle, we build the mitochondria, the slow twitch muscle, the type 1 fibers by doing endurance type training. Now, when that engine, we call that an aerobic base, is robust, then if you add some high intensity on top of that, the type 2 fibers, which are burning through a lot more kindling quicker, but you produce a byproduct called lactate. So lactate, if you're not aerobically fit and you go do high intensity, you get kind of gassed really quick, right? You get acidic and you do like 1 or 2 sets and you're done. But when you have this big aerobic base, it's called the lactate shuttle. But to keep things simple, basically you can take that lactate and actually bring it back into the mitochondria and use it as fuel. So why did Tadej Pogacar, win the Tour de France, just a few weeks ago, right? So you have those mountain stages where you're like all gas, but he's got the most robust zone 2 aerobic system. So he can follow the attack, right? If any of y'all are cycling fans, right? they attack, right? So they get really acidic, but then they can actually come back down to earth, so to speak, settle down, clear the lactate, go. Where someone who didn't have that system built would be dropped, on the first attack and never to recover. So again, they're both, right? They both matter. It's not either or. So I'm 57. I love the aerobic zone 2 cardio stuff for my brain. It's kind of meditation. But the older I get, I've got resistance bands in my office here, kettlebells, chin-up bar, burpees. The more I get, I got to keep my muscle mass. So like I have to inflict more strength training now being 57 because, your growth hormone, your testosterone's lower. When you're young, your body just naturally keeps strong by doing chores. But as we get older, we've got to resist that a little more. So mix it up. High intensity stuff has higher risk of injury. So if you are going to do high intensity exercise, make sure your movement patterns are good. Most people don't hurt themselves going for a walk. And I see so many people, they hurt themselves. I work with a veteran population. These people already have horrible backs, their knees, their hips. They're already kind of broken musculoskeletally. So they can't do a lot of that stuff anymore without putting pain in their body. So it's like, no, you don't need to do that. We can figure out things that add intensity without a lot of load too. Lower impact exercises, rowing, like rowing ergs are great for strength training, high intensity.
Now, you're a man who's no stranger to exercise yourself. I believe you've completed something like over 100 marathons, which is quite extraordinary. In recent times, we've seen a quantum leap in technology when it comes to running shoes. And these shoes aren't cheap. They're several $100 or several £100 or euros a pair. They incorporate all sorts of fancy technology, including
fancy shit.
Yeah, including carbon plates, etc. Now, at what cost, though, to the human anatomy and to the foot and to our back and to our knees?
Yeah, so those are race day performance tools, right? And I wouldn't tell anyone who's trying to win the Olympics, this week in Paris, to not get themselves a 4% advantage, because the shoes are trampolines. These carbon plate shoes. Yeah. So, but you have to have very strong, impeccable mechanics, biomechanics. So they're not for the recreational runner. They're the right tool for an elite runner to give them an extra edge, right? So they hit the ground, and if you run on a trampoline or a tuned spring for your body weight, you're going to get a little more airtime. That's no kidding. That's good. But none of these people are wearing those shoes training, because you train your body's function and strength. And they'll probably use those shoes every now and then just to rehearse how their body feels in that shoe. But none of these people wearing the super shoes are wearing them for their Sunday jogs. They're a performance tool. So bottom line, and I think it's becoming, everything that's just evolutionarily now becomes trendy. So now everyone's talking about, feet. So this is the shoe I have at work. It's Mark Sisson's shoe called a Paluva, right? It keeps my toes separated. It's flat. It looks my foot.
So just to people who are listening and can't see, you're holding up one of those minimal drop shoes. Yeah.
Yeah, with 5 toes. So the toes are actually separated.
Right.
And our toes actually matter when it's not even about running, Matthew. So people fall as they get older, and they fall forward because their toes aren't even like engaging the ground. And just as a human movement principle, that the foot should work well, the foot should be strong, the foot should be balanced. So as we get, 80, 90 years old, we don't fall, because when we fall, it's kind of game over at that point. But your toes are part of the foot spring. When the foot works like a spring, right? We all watch the boxers, right? They're all springy, and they're in these boxing shoes, these minimal shoes. The knees and the hips and the back don't take the impact, as much, right? So it's like you've got this nice shock absorber in your foot and ankle if it all works well. But if all that's kind of locked up and you run and you hit the ground, then something's got to take the hit. And then it ends up being your knees, your hip, your back. So fix your feet. You don't need to run barefoot, but walk around barefoot. Walk around in minimal shoes. Strengthen your feet just like your hands, right? It shouldn't be too far out there to think that keeping feet strong, functional, and the toes in their natural position is bad. I mean, there's no downside to that. It feels wonderful to be on the ground and your foot working well.
How important is stretching and strengthening the body and conditioning, particularly the feet and legs?
Yeah. So, I think people ignore the feet, right? They go to the gym, they have chest day, they've got glute day, they got back day, but no one, what about foot day, right? Because your feet are really important. So be thinking about your feet all day. You should be strengthening your feet at work while you're walking around. Just make sure what you have on your feet complements normal foot function. Shoes like a Vivo barefoot shoe. I know they're available in Europe. This shoe's Paluva, Mark Sisson shoe, Vibram Five Fingers, Ultra running shoes, Topo running shoes. These are shoes that are going to be foot shaped. They're going to be wide in the toe box. They're not going to elevate the heel. They're not going to be over cushioned, because an over cushioned shoe, your foot really can't feel and engage the ground. But everyone, like, it's nuanced. Like what shoe is comfortable for one person might not be for another. But keep those basic principles: wide, flat, let the toes do what they want, and apply the right amount of cushion or no cushion for your individual preference or activity. If you're going to trail run on rocks, you probably want a little more cushion than if you're just walking around on grass, or at the beach, right? Take all your shoes off in those environments. Let your feet feel the ground.
Just on those running surfaces, should we avoid one surface in favor of another? I often run on grass, for example. I find that's easier on my joints.
Yeah, I mean, like all training, Matthew, I think mix it up. The grass is great and trails are great because every step is a little different. No foot strike is the same, but probably the worst environment to run on would be, like, say you're at a treadmill, and you set it at 0% incline, and all winter, all you're running is on the same treadmill, the same incline, the same speed. Every step you take is like exactly the same. But if you went out on an Irish road, right, there's there's cobblestones, there's potholes, there's curbs, even running outside on pavement, every step is a little different. And that's good. I think mix it up. I like grass because I think it's much easier on my joints. So I preferably run exclusively on dirt and grass. If I need to run on a little pavement to get to the dirt or the grass, I'll do that. But some people don't have the luxury of dirt and grass around them. They live in a city, and there's not a nice park or something, or suburban, it's just all sidewalks. So you might use a little more cushion if you're on the roads and the pavement. But if you're in the grass, like let your feet feel the grass, just try it out, get a thinner shoe and walk first. We walk before we run. So if people are transitioning into these thinner shoes, don't go out the first day and run a bunch in them, walk around, carry groceries, go ruck. I do a lot of weight vest walking because if I run every day, I find my body doesn't recover. I love running, but like at 57, if I want to keep running for 10 more years, I've realized that I probably shouldn't run every day. So the alternate day I walk with weight, and that actually gives me a better workout, but it loads my system a little better than just the running. I put a lot of running miles on my body, so I probably just need to be smart and not do that every day, just mix it up.
And then on top of that recovery process, you're ingesting high dietary fat also, because that's apparently good for recovery.
Yeah. And I don't think of it as fat or protein. It's just real food. Like, I eat probably 4 to 6 eggs a day. So any animal product, that you get from a farmer is going to have protein and fat. Some are fattier cuts, some are leaner cuts. So just kind of mix that up. So, I'm not worried, I don't add extra fat to things just because, but most of the real food has, natural fats. They're essential fatty acids. So that's good. Butter has no protein, but it's got, really good healthy fat. So, adding a little butter to a dish that's a lean meat add the butter to the vegetables. We call them fat soluble vitamins. So Julia Childs understood this. Like every vegetable should be cooked in butter, or olive oil, right? So we know that the flavor, but the nutrient extraction is better from our vegetables, our plants, when it travels with a good natural healthy fat.
And then stretching then post-exercise, or should it be before exercising also?
Yeah, so I think the term stretching, I would call it more mobility. So for whatever movement you want to do, you've got to have the right mobility for that. Not too much, not too little. So I think, if you're here listening to this, most people are very tight in their hip flexors because they sit. And everyone should have a mobility routine that's unique to them. So I have about a 10-minute morning routine where I move my hips, I foam roll my calves, foam roll my quads, do some mobility in my back, because those are the areas I get kind of stuck. And then I'm standing at a stand-up desk here, constantly doing, when I'm typing notes or on calls, constantly doing things that the next position is the best position, right? So I'm never stuck in one position. But that's a very, a lot of people are very tight in their ankles. So hanging out in a squat, done correctly, just hanging out in a squat is powerful. Any kind of lunge is powerful. Knees over toes, anything that opens those hips up, really powerful. We have you mentioned my book in the beginning, we got a lot of mobility assessments, so you assess yourself, and if you have a deficit, correct it. But if you're good, you don't need to everyone needs just the right amount of movement. If you're, it's the Olympics, if you're a gymnastic performer, you need a ton of mobility and a ton of stability. But probably a rower, someone who's doing the 8, they don't need they want to be stiff, right? They don't want to be flexible because they're like a stiff spring, right? Their movement is this tight, flexed, extended of the back, so they've got like no hip extension because they don't want that. They're all glute power. But again, all depends. As human beings, walking is really the movement of human evolution. And when we walk, we need to be able to extend our hips. So anything that, if you're a chair sitter, do things that undo that, lunge patterns that open up the hips.
So there you go. Eat healthily and keep moving. Let me give the name of the book again. It's called Run for Your Life. Dr. Mark Cucuzzella, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you for inviting me on, Matthew. It's a privilege. You've interviewed many of my friends and colleagues.
Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of the Happy Habit podcast. If you enjoyed it or any of the previous episodes, show your support. It's free. You can like, subscribe, and tell other people about this podcast. Until next time, stay happy.